set, arm!
We give James back to you, O Lord, who gave him first to us. And as you did not lose him in the giving, so we do not lose him in the return. For not as the world gives, do you give, O lover of souls. For life is unending, because our love is undying. And the boundaries of this mortal life are but an horizon. And an horizon is just the limit of our sight. So lift us up, strong Son of God, that we may see further. Strengthen us in faith that we may see beyond the horizon. And while you prepare a place for us as you have promised, prepare us also for that happy place, that where you are, we may be also, with James and those we have loved forever. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. Khalil Gibran wrote, "When you are sorrowful, look again to your heart, and you shall see that in truth you are weeping for that which has been your delight." It is an important day when we stop to bear witness to a person's life and times among us. The difference James living and dying has made among family and community, and to take the time to express our grief, our hope, our wonder, and our memories. You are gathered here today as representative of James' world with the promise that you will carry his memories with you as you go about your lives. An old monk was once asked why he cared for ancient graves and why he cleaned the stones to preserve the carvings that were written there. His reply was simple: they still have their names. They will always have their names. A life infused with love has consequences that reach beyond time, ensuring that names, places, and memories of what was, still are, and will always be. They are not dead. They can never die. You will be forever changed, forever altered by this loss, and that is as it should be. The intensity of hurt only bears testimony to the depth and meaning of James' relationship in your life. Accept the angels that come to you in human form. Take in their comfort in words, in hugs, in deeds. Lean on them. Allow them to hold you up at times when the grief is too heavy to bear alone. James was and remains a part of you. Treasure his memory. Hold him close to you still. Carry him with you always.
States, the United States Army, and a grateful nation. Please accept this flag as an expression of our appreciation for your loving, honorable, and faithful service.
On behalf of a grateful America and the Patriot Guard Riders, for bravely and proudly carrying the burden of defending this country, for the service to this nation and sacrifices made, we sincerely thank you, PFC James W. Bissett, United States Army, Korea, 1946 to 1948. He is true American hero.
But before we do have you come up, I just want to share with you a brief story. A few years back, my daughter and I got to share a wonderful experience together. We got to see a lunar eclipse. Anybody ever seen one? You guys ever seen one? Did you stay to the end? Well, then you didn't truly see one. You only saw part of one. I'll tell you what happened. It was a wonderful thing. For us, when we saw it, it was a really cold January night, about 15 degrees, and it takes hours from the beginning of the eclipse to the final part of it when the moon totally disappears. And the excitement had built up inside of us. We kept going in the house, warming up, coming back outside. And as we got near the end, we couldn't wait to see the moon disappear. And something unusual happened that we weren't expecting. See, the Earth was blocking the sun's rays, and the Earth's atmosphere was absorbing all the colors of the rays, except for the color red. And just at the moment when we expected the moon to disappear, the Earth's atmosphere bent those red rays around the Earth and redirected them at the moon, and the moon became radiant red. So just at the moment when we expected it to be gone, it became a radiant celestial being. Well, just at that moment when James is gone, he became radiant, surrounded by God's love. Celebrate the life of James W. Bissett. It is our hope that every part of today's services will honor a life lived among us. We come to stand with his family, his daughter Christina, his grandchildren Elizabeth and James, great-grandchildren Bennett and Ella Rose, nephews David, James, niece Karen, and his former wife Barbara, and all of his family, to tell you that you're in our thoughts and our prayers because of your loss. We want to be available to you in any way possible as you face this journey of grief. To all the family's friends, let me express their gratitude for your presence. The journey of grief is long, and those who walk it should not have to walk it alone. In times like these, nothing takes the place of friends. Your presence helps the family realize how valuable Jim was to others and shows what an impact his living and dying has made. Do we have any baseball fans here today? Like James, I grew up a Yankees fan. Baseball and life kind of have a lot in common. A. Bartlett Giamatti once said, "It breaks your heart. It is designed to break your heart. The game begins in the spring when everything else begins again, and it blossoms in the summer, filling the afternoons and evenings, and then as soon as the chill rains come, it stops and leaves you to face the fall alone." In many ways, our lives are like a baseball season. We look fondly at the beginning of our lives with passion and joy. We wish that we could stay in the moment forever, similar to the hopeful beginning that every baseball fan has at the start of a season. As life progresses, we develop a deep love that is enriched by the time we share and the memories we make together. Just like a team building chemistry during the summer of the season. The team members learn each other's tendencies and know how to work off of each other, becoming one unit as they progress through the year. But then the rains come, our loved one becomes sick and passes. We are left alone to face the fall, wondering how we'll get through the dark days ahead. For baseball fans, there's the hope of the next season, just as we have the hope that we will see each other again in the next life.
Fred couldn't be here today and asked us to read this letter. When Mom and I were with Grandpa in March in the rehab center, he wasn't always sure where he was or what had happened to him, but mentioned Fred Paulson, and his face lit up. Ask him, "Do you know who Fred Paulson is?" And with a childlike peace in his eyes and a real sense of comfort in his voice, he would say, "He's my best friend." The letter he wrote. Dear Christina, I am saddened and disappointed that I am unable to be with you, your children and grandchildren and friends for the celebration of your dad's life. Your dad and I met over 30 years ago when we were both going through career changes. We made a real connection at that time, which truly lasted a lifetime. I've considered myself very fortunate to have had Jim as a friend over these last 30-plus years. He was a man of many faces. I am sure I saw more sides of him than most people who knew him. There was a professional side, which many people who knew him experienced. In his professional life, he was known for his work ethic. He was dedicated, knowledgeable, thorough, and exacting in everything he did. As my sales partner in real estate, we complemented each other and made a great team. As an office manager at Hunt Real Estate, he earned the respect of the agents, other managers, and administration. His hard work and dedication was responsible for Hunt's Amherst office and its agents becoming the best in Western New York. Did you pay him for that, Peter? Sounds like a little plug there. There was also the private side to him. In fact, most people, even those who worked with him regularly, didn't know him personally. They experienced him as a very private person who would only let you know what he wanted you to know. Those of us who had the honor of knowing that personal side of him knew his compassionate and generous side. I cannot remember how many times I saw him reach out to total strangers who were less fortunate than he and help them in whatever way he could. This was especially true around the holidays. Your dad loved the holidays and had a true holiday spirit. He was exceptionally proud of you, Christina, and of all of your accomplishments. He spoke of you and your family all the time. The pictures you sent meant more to him than you may realize. I could go on and on with different stories, but the bottom line is that all those of us who have crossed his path were better for it, and he will be greatly missed. In closing, to use a word coined by an old philosopher friend of mine, James W. Bissett, tiddly-poops, a word we never quite knew the meaning of, but it always put a smile on my face. My love and thoughts will be with you and your family always. Warm regards, Fred Paulson. And that's the cross stitch that I put on the memory table. It was on his door in his condo. I don't know a whole lot more than that. So So Fred's letter got me thinking. My time with my grandfather through the years was fairly sporadic, but when visiting with him this spring, I realized the pieces of him that live in me. For instance, his penchant for nice cars, great shoes, and high-quality chocolate. Come by all that honestly. His love of the outdoors, basking in the sun on the water, all things nautical, that seems to be generations in our blood. His very particular attention to detail, okay, some may call it OCD. His love of real estate, only he was smart enough to sell it instead of wanting to buy it all. Last night, our cousin Dave, Jim's nephew, was able to articulate that apparently there's a Bisset affliction in which, on occasion, you say what you mean and mean what you say, sometimes without a filter. He was a real people person, yet intensely private. I realized apparently that skipped a generation, Mom. His complete adoration of and love for Bennett and Ella, okay, that's an easy one. I will hear his distinctive voice saying certain phrases like, well, I tell you, kid, yes, indeedy, and whoa, Nellie. I'm grateful for the time we had together this spring and for the gift of being able to witness the end of his life. I am looking forward to our time together now being less sporadic, to continuing to learn from him in his life, and I will be better for it. When Great Trees Fall, Maya Angelou. When great trees fall, rocks on distant hills shudder. Lions hunker down in tall grasses, and even elephants lumber after safety. When great trees fall in forests, small things recoil into silence, their senses eroded beyond fear. When great souls die, the air around us becomes light, rare, sterile. We breathe briefly. Our eyes briefly see with a hurtful clarity. Our memory, suddenly sharpened, examines, gnaws on kind words unsaid, promised walks never taken. Great souls die, and our reality bound to them takes leave of us. Our souls, dependent upon their nurture, now shrink. Our minds, formed and informed by their radiance, fall away. We are not so much maddened as reduced to the unutterable ignorance of dark, cold caves. And when great souls die, after a period, peace blooms. Slowly and always irregularly. Spaces fill with a kind of soothing electric vibration. Our senses, restored, never to be the same, whisper to us, they existed. They existed. We can be and be better, for they existed.
Asked by Christina to speak to what I know of Jim, and I will say I know because it's a living memory in me. In reading the beautifully written obituary on Jim that appeared in the paper, I was stricken by how much I did not know about Jim's business experience before he joined us, way back in 1983. He was a self-made man, having worked his way up to a leadership position in each of the careers he pursued. And in pursuing several, from manufacturing to bagels, all basically starting from scratch, he was a Renaissance man. Jim responded to an ad that I ran in the Buffalo News Home Finder. I remember the ad because Jim had cut it out and brought it with him to our interview. The first minute that he walked into my office back in 1983 was the only time that our age difference ever entered my mind. From that point forward, he always seemed youthful, with high behavioral energy, and I never really knew his age. I never asked, and he never volunteered. But from that first moment, we were colleagues. He was always a gentleman and treated me with respect in spite of our age difference, sitting through a training program that I ran many years as his junior, never asking more questions than he needed to, trying to impress no one. Although he never said it quite this way, His motto seemed to be, just show me how and turn me loose. He asked me to go on his very first listing appointment, which was referred to in the printout there that I displayed there. What we call an expired listing. Now, I don't mean to educate you here today, but Jim and I went to the house. I did the presentation. We secured the listing in a competitive situation. As we walked out, he said, "Thank you," and words to the effect, "I get it now." He never asked me again. Expireds became his specialty. He was loath to build his business on his center of influence, which our agents all tell you is the way they build their business. And his center of influence in his personal life, as we heard before, he kept very much to himself. Jim focused on this one area of our business, I always assumed, because few agents were very good at it, and virtually no one started as early in the morning as he did. Arriving at the office often by 6 a.m., he had absolutely no competition for the first look at listings at other brokers that were expiring that day. So by the time the rest of the industry came to life, usually well after 9 a.m., his day was set, full of expired listing appointments. Like his previous professions, he rose through the ranks in our organization, which is very horizontal in structure. We have very few layers. First, he became a leader in sales in our Amherst branch office, then in the company as a whole. And along the way, he never hesitated to help other agents in the office, never ever sensing or expressing a cutthroat competitiveness between or among agents in our industry that, unfortunately, we happen to be known for. He and Fred Paulson were early pioneers, as you've heard, of a two-person team, which shared in all transactions, covering for each other, and selflessly becoming a combined success. In retrospect, this made perfect sense. I met Fred on his first day ever in our community when he had been hired to head a bank. Fred's business experience and Jim's were parallel and mature. Their combination in the world of real estate was remarkable. It concerned me that I was breaking up this relationship in a way when I asked Jim to take over management of our Amherst office as we were building our first ever administrative structure to handle our growth. Jim said he'd think about it and get back to me, which he did the very next day. Jim took control in his own style, quickly earning the respect and confidence of our salespeople and our support staff of one. He grew the office, supervised the reconstruction of the building at 4363 Main Street, ran well-attended sales meetings. I can still see him standing at the podium at our not exactly legal second floor. He would cross his legs like this, and he would lean to one side, look kind of over the crowd a little bit, and begin with the word "basically." And after that, after the meeting was over, he'd move around the office at a fairly rapid pace, always a rapid pace, practicing one-minute management long before it was made a business fad. He seemed to know every listing and every transaction, which means he had to know each of our agents. It is easy to see the esteem in which they held Jim. The office he ran became a formidable competitor, rising to the top of our company and the industry. And it was not built on superstars. We were fortunate to have them in our office, like Gene Nowak, Kathy Anderson, and Fred Paulson himself, but under Jim's leadership, they assumed their positions on the team while being shown the respect and recognition their success warranted. At our management meetings, he wasted little breath, but when he spoke, his questions often went exactly to the point. This may be why he liked the word "basically." He seemed to regularly cut through the confusion and get to the basics, and with his probing questions and simple yet accurate observations. The solution always seemed clear to Jim, and he lived a bias toward action. In building our first executive group of sorts, and I use that term loosely, it was natural to include Jim. He became a vice president. He never, that I can recall, hearkened back to his previous business experiences, never regaling us with stories of his past successes. Yet he drew on them without lauding them over us. Jim could be counted on for accurate insights and swift movement in whatever direction we chose. When Jim started with us, he said words to the effect that real estate would be his last career. But as I got to know him, it became clear that he would not overstay his welcome. Not living up to the axiom in our business that says, old realtors never die, they just become listless. Jim would pick a time that gave him the time to recreate in some new way. So when he told me he was retiring and moving, I was happy for him. And as I say, I accepted his resignation with regret, but I was very happy that he'd chosen that time. He had a lot of life left in him, and he certainly wanted to and take full advantage of what was ahead. He was not one to look back. We missed him, but I knew that he would be on to his new life without encumbrances of the past, except Fred. And I don't consider them an encumbrance. It makes me happy to think that it was in our little environment that this apparently wonderful working relationship, and more significantly, a remarkable friendship was kindled. As I mentioned earlier, Jim could be counted on, So, I just want to say thank you to Jim for being who he was to me, which was a dignified, humble, unpretentious gentleman. And I want to thank him for all he contributed to our company, to our agents, to my family, and to me personally. As I mentioned earlier, Jim could always be counted on to begin his meetings with that word, basically. He also had a very unique way of ending his meetings, which is on our program here, and you've already heard before. But there was no crescendo, there was no profound statement that was designed to change our lives. Just one word whose meaning, as we've heard, still escapes me like it did apparently everybody else. And so I will close the same way, tiddly poops. And so I will close the same way, tiddly poops.
My great-grandpa loved to play and watch baseball. His favorite teams were the New York Yankees and the Tampa Bay Rays. I love baseball, and the Yankees are one of my favorite teams too. In honor of my great-grandpa and our shared love of baseball, please sing along to take me out to the ball game. Me out to the ball game. Me out to the crowd. I need some peanuts and crackers. I don't care if I never get back home. Rooting for the home team. It's a shame, for it's 1, 2, 3 strikes you're out at the old ball game. Take me out to the ball game. Take me out to the crowd. I need some peanuts and cracker jacks. I don't care if I never get back to this root for the Yankees. If they don't win, it's a shame. For it's 1, 2, 3 strikes you're out at the old ball game.
Today we have joined to celebrate the life of my father, James Bissett. As you have heard, he was a man who was proud of his Korean military service and of his career with Hunt Real Estate, and who had an undying passion for the great American pastime of baseball. My father was also deeply proud of his Scottish heritage, sharing stories of his ancestors and quoting the famous Scotsman poet Robbie Burns throughout his adult life. As a final honor today, when I have finished with my eulogy, I would invite all of you to join in singing Robbie Burns' most famous poem put to music, Auld Lang Syne. The words are on the back of your program. And when we have finished that final round, please join together with my family in the reception area right here next door so that we can share a few moments to say thank you for being here today and for your love and support. Where to begin? Telling the story of the dash between a loved one's birth date and death date is a challenge. Most often that challenge comes in the form of trying to decide where to begin. Ultimately, or basically perhaps, in writing this eulogy for my father, I decided to begin where I left off, with my mother's eulogy. When I wrote about my mother for her funeral 17 years ago, 15 close, I felt strongly connected to her, and I carried the intensity of that connection with me for quite some time after her passing. The fact that was most apparent in my writing, that fact was most apparent in my writing, where for years I wrote essays about women in general, and in particular about my mother, incorporating the tagline, "I am my mother's daughter." Just to be clear, my mother and I did not enjoy a particularly close relationship. In fact, we were as different as night and day. But our shared gender connection and the last months of her life spent in my home with me as her caregiver provided us with a connection that became compelling, and thus my mother's daughter tagline. However, as life often does, a moment came that changed my mother's daughter perspective in a way that I found kind of shocking and a little on the disturbing side. Again, it was while writing, but this time I had put pen to paper about my father. In the same family pattern as my mom, my father and I were not really close. He had moved away from Buffalo years ago and created his own life. And obviously we didn't have the shared gender thing going on. So, between us, we lacked the ties that bound my mother and I. But by the end of that essay I was writing about my father and some of his lifelong habits, I came to a startling realization. I wasn't my mother's daughter at all. I was actually my father's daughter. How could this be? How could I have not realized this important fact of my life? Like any good denial, I went through stages of anger, disbelief, depression, and outright disregard. Actually, years of disregard. Until the last 2 months. Until I spent time packing up my father's life. His clothes. Amidst my father's wardrobe, I found a man who was beyond the definition of a clothes horse, and may just have qualified as the male version of Emil DeMarcos. He lived in a 4-room apartment in St. Petersburg with a closet that actually qualified as one of those rooms, and it was full of shirts, pants, sweaters, sweatshirts, shoes, and of course, baseball hats. But even as a kid, I remember my father's penchant for fine clothes and Florsheim shoes. What was always most remarkable to me about his GQ nature was his attention to clothing details. Accessories like the perfect pocket handkerchief to complement but not necessarily match his tie. Or just the right wrist watch. Sometimes leather, sometimes silver, sometimes gold. And it wasn't just that he was good at dressing himself and putting together looks for himself. My father basically dressed my mother from head to toe, blending colors, fabrics, textures, and accessories in truly distinctive styles. All of which has clearly confirmed to me that my TJ Maxx shopping addiction is something to which I am genetically predisposed. While my dad had so now the next thing would be his knickknacks. While my dad lived in a small apartment, it was fully decorated with all kinds of knickknacks. 21 moving boxes of knickknacks, to be exact. While to many my father's collection may have appeared like a random assortment, what stood out to me as I packed them carefully away were the detailed model sports cars and a wide range of art related to the sea. The models were directly connected to my father's lifelong love affair with cars, particularly bright red convertibles, of which he owned 3, as I recall. The art was related to his family's connection to the ocean. My father's second cousin was captain of a ship that rescued passengers from the Titanic. His father was a sailor who left home at too young an age under a series of 3 forged birth certificates in order to fulfill his seafarer's wanderlust. He ended up sailing around the world and befriending the infamous as well as the famous, including Call of the Wild author Jack London. My father himself worked early on as a shipman on a Great Lakes line that ferried passengers between Buffalo and Cleveland. His last home was set in a high-rise where he could enjoy a daily view of the ocean anytime he wanted. So I've realized the root of my insatiable desire to experience waterways wherever I may be, made all the better whenever I can cruise the shoreline in a bright red convertible. his real estate career. In his apartment, my father had created a Hunt Real Estate Wall of Fame. It held a tribute given to him upon his retirement that sits on this memory table today, along with a photograph of a tree, with an explanation alongside that the tree was planted on the grounds of the Williamsville office in his honor and for the contribution he made to the company. My dad always talked about his career at Hunt, especially as his memory faded. As Peter noted, he knew every detail of every person, of every listing. And he would always say, you know, when I managed the Hunt office, I could remember all kinds of facts and figures. Despite the real estate was a full-stream midlife career change about face from manufacturing steel to selling homes, my dad made up his mind that when he did it, he was going to do it, and then went ahead and did his best, which made him a highly successful real estate agent and manager. As I find myself thinking about the challenges I've faced in starting my career at the 50-year mark, I realize that my father did the same thing, only he was 5 years older and obviously wiser, and that he retired by the time he reached the age that I'm at now. But I have no doubt that some of his Scotsman's determination will someday help me create my own wall of fame, and maybe even a tree planted somewhere as well. His holiday decorations. My strongest memories of my father revolve around the holidays, especially Christmas. He would save his money all year so that Christmas he could make magic for my mom and I. To top it off, Christmas was my mother's birthday, which really raised the bar for my dad. And it wasn't just that he bought enough presents to actually fill a room, it was the way he orchestrated the whole day. From the early morning Christmas moment when I would excitedly bound into my parents' room, Dad would command Mom and I to stay in place upstairs until he went to see if Santa had come. While we waited, Dad would plug in all the tree lights and put Christmas music on the stereo. And when he was satisfied that all the magic was just right, he would summon us to his winter wonderland. After minutes of oohing and eyeing over our Christmas bounty, Dad would allow us to open our stockings. But once the stockings were done, so was the unwrapping. From the early morning moment that we finished our stockings, my father decreed a moratorium on Christmas gifts until after dinner. Yes, that's right. From as early as I can remember, Christmas Day was spent sitting and looking at gifts spilling out from underneath the tree, but not touching them until 5 p.m. or later if Mom was late with dinner. Then, when he finally would let us open the presents, he would play Santa, handing them out one at a time. And you had to sit, and you were required to watch each person open their gift and enjoy it. No rushing was allowed. While it may sound a little crazy, Dad's Christmases were actually amazing experiences. And I don't know how he did it, but each year he found ways to make the decorations on the trees and around the house more beautiful and the gifts more amazing. He put every part of his heart and soul into making Christmas just that special. And I believe if you were to ask my children, that they will tell you that their Christmas memories hold a lot of the same stories of a crazy mom trying to make Christmas magic. And one more thing, even now, I still have a really hard time going to sleep on Christmas Eve, being so excited. His family. My dad was not a family man. Don't get me wrong, he loved his parents and his brother and my mom and I and his grandchildren. But it was love in his own way. And that was sometimes hard to figure out, mostly because he just couldn't tell you. I can't count the number of times that his friends told me how much my dad loved me and how he bragged about me all the time. And yet, till the last few years of our relationship, I never heard him speak those words. Yet in packing up his apartment, I collected stacks of photographs of his great-grandchildren, Bennett, Christopher, and Ella Rose, all lovingly sent to him by his granddaughter, Lisa. They hung on every wall in every room of his apartment. And then there were the photos and copies of my writing in my book that I had sent to him over the years. When we'd talk on the phone, He would tell me that he had them all displayed in one central place in his living room so that when people came over to visit, they could see just how successful I'd been. He would laugh and call it my shrine. And I thought that sounded so weird until I took a look around my own home and realized that I worshiped at that same altar of family photos and mementos. And so, the more I sorted and cleaned and packed my father's apartment, the more I realized how, in so many ways, I am my father's daughter. And shirt by shirt, shoe by shoe, photo by photo, knick-knack by knick-knack, Santa by Santa, I was okay with that. Tiddly poops, Dad. Should ever brought to mind, should old acquaintance be forgot and old lang syne. For old lang syne, my dear, for old lang syne, we'll take a cup of kindness yet for old lang syne. And surely you'll buy your pine cup, and surely I'll buy mine, and we'll take a cup of kindness yet for old lang syne. For old lang syne, my dear, for old lang syne, we'll take a cup of kindness yet for old lang syne. And there's a hand, my trusty friend, and give